Well, hello good people, I'm Dmitry, and you know what? In this video I want to challenge myself because I change cases way too often, so reconfigure my system into another enclosure depending on what is the latest and greatest that I enjoy. And it is kind of like part of my space. It's there, it's in videos, I enjoy looking at it, but I want to challenge myself. What happens if I don't use my main workstation desktop PC for a week? And instead, we're gonna use a laptop computer, the MSI P65 Creator Edition. It is a pretty decked out computer, but I wonder in terms of what I'll be missing, from a traditional desktop PC, and what will be the advantages. So let's begin the unboxing. So just look at that thing. It is amazing at how thin it is. I've never actually used the notebook computer for my main workstation PC. I've always had desktop PCs that are gigantic, that are like towering and powering. But what happens if you just kind of switch to something like that? Well, let's discuss right after this. Oh, come on, what are you doing? Don't sit on the keyboard. Sorry, I didn't realize. It's so low profile.
Did you bring the stuff?
I sure did. It's so compact. It's a good tool, trust me. This brushed aluminum plate, floating half-height keycaps, MX Cherry low-profile switches, a Type-C connection, and comes in different sizes too. The Cooler Master SK series. Careful not to miss them. Links below. Alright good people, so my experience with the MSI P65 Creator Edition has been surprisingly satisfactory from a gaming perspective, from a productivity perspective, from a portability perspective, and I feel like this is a nice complete package. So first I traveled with this thing to Vegas for our CES coverage, so all the videos were made on it. Absolutely no issues in terms of rendering performance. I did have an issue with the cooler, so this was a replacement, and bringing back to the desktop, it's a significant downgrade in hardware versus what I had on my desktop PC with the 2080 Ti and the 9900K. But here, the 8750H CPU plus the GTX 1070 Max-Q, hardware-wise, is perfectly capable to, deliver what I needed to deliver for my daily workload. But the main advantage for me with this type of setup is being able to just unplug everything, put this thing in my backpack, and work remotely. And so for a lot of people who do that, office work, home work, and something in between that whole travel section, this is a really good machine. I shot a wedding in Toronto and edited all my photos on battery life while traveling to Montreal on a train for 6 hours, and I arrived with some battery left over, and this is with me rendering all the photos and editing all the photos as well. So battery life without this thing being plugged in is actually really good for productivity. Obviously you don't want to be gaming on it because the performance completely tanks, but from a productivity standpoint, battery life on this thing is actually quite good. Now I will say the build quality here is just okay. It's not superb in any way, especially compared to like the Razer Blade or the MacBook, for example. Here we have multiple points of flexibility on the chassis, both on the interior and on the exterior, and so I would be careful. Now I feel like this whole Creator Edition of notebooks is going to become a lot more popular and mainstream in 2019 because the P65 is just the GS65 in disguise. So a white color scheme, we have an added fingerprint sensor, and no longer the SteelSeries keyboard that everybody loves on the GS65. So if you're not a fan of that gold and black color scheme, then the white limited edition is, your choice. Now to get this thing ready for a true desktop replacement, I first needed to get a notebook stand for appropriate elevation and nice angle for the keyboard. I'm not a fan of the wobbling situation when I'm typing on the keyboard, but I do have an external one connected, so that kind of solves that issue. I also got a USB hub from Anker, and I velcroed it to the bottom of the stand so I can remove that if I need to bring it with me on the go, and just gives me additional USB ports. But in terms of the port selection on the notebook itself, I am surprised at how well equipped it is to be in fix this exact situation. We have plenty of USB ports, we have a full-sized Ethernet jack, we have plenty of display connectivity, so a full-size HDMI, we have a mini display port and a Thunderbolt 3. This is how I'm powering this secondary display with a Type-C cable. Although for a notebook that is targeted for creators, the lack of an SD card is kind of disappointing. The screen on here is fantastic, 144 Hz, which is awesome for general productivity, but especially great for gaming. And although this is not a true IPS display because of that high refresh rate, color accuracy for my work has been satisfactory. The bezels are super thin and the screen can fold all the way back. Not exactly sure why you would use that, but it has that extra mobility. Also a positive is that I've experienced no scaling issues in Windows like I was expecting for some reason. So if I drag my window from a 4K display to the Full HD display, you know, everything still stays sharp. There is no blurry text. And since I moved away from the dual screen configuration with my desktops, I'm actually quite liking what's happening here with the smaller screen onto which I can play like some YouTube videos, and on the main display I can have email open, I can be doing editing and just a little bit more real estate. And then when I have to, you know, go to a coffee shop to do some work, unplug everything, take it with me. It's quite nice. The keyboard on this thing feels great, nice tactile actuations, fast rebounds. However, the illumination is quite disappointing. It is uneven between characters. There is light leak behind the keycaps, and also if you have anything white on the screen, it is completely invisible. You cannot actually see what the keys are whenever they're illuminated. So I tend to just turn off the illumination in the evenings because the light from the screen spills onto the white keys and the white illumination, and you cannot see the actual characters. The trackpad on here I feel like is the weakest point for portable needs. So the surface is not as smooth as I was expecting. It is not using Windows Precision drivers, or it is, but it's got Synapse drivers on top of that, so it's not exactly precise. And also there is a fingerprint scanner built into the top left side, which means that that whole area cannot be used for tracking, but you have to really press your finger inside for it to actually, you know, recognize the fingerprint. Otherwise it won't notice that there is a finger on top. The speakers are located at the bottom, so in my configuration I actually don't mind that at all. It bounces that audio nicely from you know, the table surface. Now as for performance, obviously my 2080 Ti and the 9900K system is going to be much better, but for games this thing is killer with the GTX 1070 Max-Q. I'm getting respectable frame rates, something that you know, I play around with medium to ultra settings, and I'm pretty happy with the frame rates depending on the title. But more importantly, I've been very happy with rendering performance in Adobe Premiere with the CUDA acceleration with that the GTX 1070 Max-Q, and that i7-8750H has integrated graphics, the UHD 630, which is the same you know, graphics that we find on 9900K, the 8700K. So that quick sync acceleration with Adobe Premiere is absolutely, it just flies through things. But the major limitation here would be internal storage. I only have 256 gigabytes inside this machine, which is nothing for content creators. This video is gonna occupy 100 gigabytes alone, so you have to rely on external storage, either NAS solutions or just external USB sticks and stuff. And this is kind of what how I'm working from here, so that I can, you know, transfer all my gaming library, all my productivity work folders from one computer to the other. I also only have 16 gigabytes of memory here, which is a single channel, so that's also a slowdown for Adobe Premiere and gaming too. So you could upgrade this to 32 gigabytes. But the second slot is, I think it's below the keyboard, so it's not super accessible. Also, another annoying issue that I've encountered on this machine and on the first one are driver issues. So on the first machine, my Intel graphics drivers were crashing constantly, whereas here, the NVIDIA drivers are constantly crashing. Until I reinstalled them, they were not detected. I had to revert back to the original drivers from MSI, which are outdated, and some games freak out. They're like, hey, your drivers are outdated. I finally was able to update everything, and so far haven't experienced any crashes like I have in the past, but that's something that I wasn't expecting to encounter, and certainly don't have this issue on my you know, desktop PC. And my takeaway from this entire experience is that notebooks are getting so good and so powerful that they have this beautiful balance of being totally appropriate as a desktop replacement, while also having this entire portability factor built in, because this thing is super light, it's thin, I can just collapse it, bring a mouse with me and a pair of headphones, and be totally satisfied with the performance and everything that's kind of revolves around the notebook. The power brick is also pretty small. You know, for cable management, for example, you could also argue that it gives you slightly cleaner space if you were to use something like this as a desktop replacement. Overall, I'm quite happy with how this Creator edition of the P65 has delivered. I think that is all I have to say about my experience using this thing as a desktop replacement, and I think it has met my expectations on an overall level. I would say be careful with the build quality. I don't like the trackpad. The keyboard illumination could be better, because otherwise you can't really see the keys when something bright is on the screen and it just spills onto white keys. But in general, it's a fantastic laptop, and it's a good disguise to target not only gamers with their GS65, but everyone else who doesn't want a black and red notebook, but has the exact same specs and everything else to be the same as well. This is why the Creator Edition exists. So everything will be linked in the description below, check it out. And if you've been using a notebook as your main PC for the desktop, what's your experience been like? And would you consider going the desktop route, or are you kind of like settled within your ways? This has definitely spoiled me now in terms of being able to have everything on one machine that I can take away when I work, but everything is on my USB hard drives anyways, because the capacity on this thing is not that good. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'm Dmitry. I'll talk to you in the next video.